Welcome to Sinister Memory. If you're new here, subscribe now and let us know in the comments where you're listening to this story. Let's get to today's story, the yellowed pages of Dr. Heinrich Zimmermann's medical journal, discovered in 1987 within the crumbling walls of a defunct asylum in rural Pennsylvania, contained observations that challenged the very foundations of medical understanding in the late 19th century. The leather-bound tome, its spine cracked and binding loose, had been sealed within a lead-lined box, alongside other documents deemed too disturbing for public consumption by the medical establishment of 1879. Dr. Zimmermann, a German-born physician who had immigrated to America following his expulsion from the University of Heidelberg under circumstances that remain unclear, maintained meticulous records of the extraordinary case that would consume the final years of his career. His handwriting, initially precise and clinical, gradually deteriorated throughout the documentation, suggesting a progressive decline in his mental state as the events unfolded. The case concerned Anna Swan Bates, a woman of exceptional stature whose physical dimensions had already made her a curiosity in traveling exhibitions across North America. Standing at 7 feet 11 inches in height, Anna had married Martin Van Buren Bates, himself a giant of 7 feet 9 inches, in a ceremony that attracted national attention in 1871. What followed their union, however, transcended mere spectacle and entered realms that medical science was unprepared to comprehend. Dr. Zimmermann first encountered the couple in the autumn of 1878, when they sought his expertise regarding Anna's condition. His initial examination revealed a pregnancy that defied conventional understanding. The measurements he recorded seemed impossible, yet multiple verifications confirmed their accuracy. Anna's abdomen had expanded to proportions that should have proven fatal to any woman, regardless of her exceptional size. The physician's early entries describe his fascination with what he initially considered a remarkable but explainable medical anomaly. He theorized that the combination of both parents' extraordinary genetics might produce offspring of unprecedented dimensions. His calculations, based on the limited understanding of heredity available at the time, suggested the possibility of a child weighing between 15 and 20 pounds at birth, already a dangerous prospect for any delivery. However, as the pregnancy progressed through its second trimester, Dr. Zimmermann's observations took on an increasingly troubled tone. Anna's condition appeared to violate fundamental principles of human biology. Her weight gain exceeded any documented case in medical literature, yet she maintained remarkable vitality. More disturbing still were the movements he detected during his examinations, patterns of activity that seemed inconsistent with normal fetal development. The doctor's journal entries from this period reveal his growing unease with certain aspects of the case that he struggled to articulate in scientific terms. He wrote extensively about the unusual sounds emanating from Anna's womb during his examinations, describing them as resembling the grinding of massive gears within some infernal mechanism. These observations, he noted, occurred only during the deepest phases of his physical assessments, when his stethoscope was pressed firmly against specific regions of her abdomen. Local midwives, initially eager to assist with what they anticipated would be a historically significant birth, began to distance themselves from the case as rumors spread throughout the rural community. Dr. Zimmermann documented their reluctance with clinical detachment, yet his private notes reveal his own mounting concerns about the supernatural interpretations that began to circulate among the local population. The physician's attempts to consult with colleagues in Philadelphia and Boston met with skepticism and, eventually, professional ostracism. His detailed measurements and observations were dismissed as exaggerations or outright fabrications. The medical establishment's rejection of his findings forced Dr. Zimmermann into isolation, leaving him alone to monitor a pregnancy that continued to challenge every principle of his training. As winter approached, Anna's condition entered what Dr. Zimmermann termed the phase of impossibility. His measurements indicated that the fetus had achieved dimensions that should have resulted in immediate medical crisis. Yet Anna continued to function with an energy that bordered on the supernatural. The doctor's handwriting during this period became increasingly erratic, filled with crossed-out passages and margin notes that suggested a man grappling with phenomena beyond his comprehension. The final entries of this opening phase of documentation hint at Dr. Zimmermann's growing conviction that he was witnessing something that transcended the boundaries of natural law. His scientific training warred with observations that defied rational explanation, creating a psychological tension that would ultimately consume him entirely. The stage was set for events that would challenge not only medical understanding, but the very nature of human existence itself. The winter of 1878 brought with it a series of observations that would forever alter Dr. Zimmermann's understanding of human physiology. His journal entries from December reveal a methodical documentation of measurements that defied every medical precedent he had encountered during his 23 years of practice. The precision of his recordings, cross-referenced with multiple instruments and verified through repeated examinations, left no room for error or misinterpretation. Anna's abdominal circumference had reached dimensions that should have proven incompatible with life itself. Dr. Zimmermann's calculations indicated that the developing child had achieved a weight that exceeded the capacity of any human womb to contain. Yet Anna continued to move about her daily activities with an ease that contradicted every principle of obstetric medicine. Her vital signs remained stable, her appetite robust, and her energy levels unnaturally elevated for a woman in her condition. The doctor's attempts to estimate the fetus's size through external palpation yielded results that he initially refused to record, believing his techniques must be flawed. Only after weeks of repeated examinations, using instruments borrowed from veterinary practices accustomed to examining large livestock, did he reluctantly document his findings. The measurements suggested a developing infant of proportions that belonged more to the realm of mythology than medical reality. Dr. Zimmermann's correspondence with European colleagues during this period reveals his desperate search for historical precedents. He scoured ancient medical texts, consulted with specialists in comparative anatomy, and even reached out to scholars of folklore and mythology. The responses he received ranged from polite dismissal to accusations of professional misconduct. One particularly harsh letter from a former mentor at Heidelberg suggested that Dr. Zimmermann had succumbed to the primitive superstitions of his adopted country. The isolation imposed by his colleagues, skepticism, drove Dr. Zimmermann to increasingly unconventional research methods. He began studying accounts of giants and anomalous births from various cultures, searching for patterns that might explain Anna's condition. His journal entries from this period reveal a man torn between scientific rationality and the undeniable evidence before his eyes. The physical examination techniques required for Anna's case pushed the boundaries of 19th century medical practice. Dr. Zimmermann was forced to develop new methods of assessment, creating specialized instruments and measurement protocols that had never been attempted on a human subject. His detailed sketches of these improvised tools, preserved alongside his written observations, demonstrate the extraordinary lengths to which he went to maintain scientific rigor in the face of impossible circumstances. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Zimmermann's documentation concerned the fetal movements he detected during his examinations. The patterns of activity he recorded suggested a level of coordination and strength that seemed inconsistent with normal prenatal development. His descriptions of these movements, couched in the clinical language of medical observation, nonetheless conveyed an underlying sense of unease that permeated his professional detachment. Local residents began to take notice of the unusual circumstances surrounding Anna's pregnancy. Dr. Zimmerman documented the gradual shift in community attitude from curiosity to apprehension. Farmers reported that livestock became agitated when brought near the Bates residence. Dogs refused to approach the property, and cats disappeared from the surrounding area entirely. These observations, while dismissed by Dr. Zimmerman as coincidental, were meticulously recorded alongside his medical findings. The doctor's own physical health began to deteriorate during this period of intensive observation. His journal entries reveal symptoms of chronic fatigue, persistent headaches, and a recurring nightmare that involved examining patients whose internal anatomy defied comprehension. He attributed these ailments to the stress of his professional isolation, yet the timing of their onset coincided precisely with his deepest involvement in Anna's case. As the pregnancy entered its third trimester, Dr. Zimmerman's measurements indicated that the fetus had achieved dimensions that challenged the fundamental laws of physics. The weight distribution within Anna's body should have resulted in immediate skeletal collapse, yet she continued to walk upright with a grace that seemed to mock the limitations of human anatomy. The doctor's attempts to explain this phenomenon through conventional medical theory proved futile. The scientific instruments of the era proved inadequate for the precise measurements required by Anna's condition. Dr. Zimmerman was forced to commission specialized equipment from craftsmen who worked in complete ignorance of their tools' intended purpose. The expense of these custom instruments, combined with his declining practice due to professional ostracism, placed severe financial strain on the doctor's resources. The chapter of Dr. Zimmerman's documentation concluded with his growing realization that he was witnessing something that transcended the boundaries of natural law. His final entries from this period reveal a man struggling to maintain scientific objectivity while confronting evidence that challenged the very foundations of his worldview. The stage was set for revelations that would push both doctor and patient beyond the limits of human endurance. The arrival of spring in 1879 brought with it a series of developments that would fundamentally alter Dr. Zimmerman's perception of reality itself. His journal entries from March reveal a physician grappling with observations that challenged not only medical understanding, but the very nature of existence. The meticulous documentation that had characterized his earlier work began to show signs of strain as he struggled to record phenomena that defied conventional description. Anna's condition had progressed beyond any recognizable pattern of human pregnancy. Dr. Zimmerman's measurements indicated that the developing child had achieved proportions that should have resulted in immediate maternal death. Yet Anna displayed a vitality that bordered on the supernatural. Her skin had taken on an unusual luminescence, particularly visible during evening examinations when lamplight cast strange shadows across her distended form. The doctor's attempts to monitor fetal heartbeat yielded results that confounded his understanding of cardiac physiology. The rhythm he detected through his stethoscope suggested a heart of extraordinary size, beating with a force that seemed to reverberate through Anna's entire body. More disturbing still were the secondary rhythms he occasionally detected, additional cardiac patterns that implied the presence of multiple circulatory systems within a single organism. Dr. Zimmerman's examination techniques had evolved to accommodate the unprecedented nature of Anna's condition. He had developed a series of specialized palpation methods that allowed him to map the contours of the developing fetus with remarkable precision. These examinations revealed anatomical structures that seemed to shift and reconfigure between sessions, as if the child were undergoing continuous metamorphosis within the womb. The physician's correspondence during this period reveals his growing desperation to find scientific explanations for the phenomena he observed. He reached out to colleagues in London, Paris, and Vienna, sharing carefully edited versions of his findings in hopes of securing consultation or collaboration. The responses he received ranged from polite concern for his mental health to outright accusations of professional fraud. Local folklore began to intertwine with medical observation, as community members shared increasingly disturbing accounts of events surrounding the Bates residence. Dr. Zimmerman documented these reports with scientific detachment, yet their consistency suggested patterns that transcended mere superstition. Witnesses described unusual atmospheric disturbances, including unexplained temperature fluctuations and electromagnetic phenomena that affected compass readings and timepiece accuracy. The doctor's own health continued its steady decline throughout this period. His journal entries reveal symptoms that suggested chronic exposure to some unknown pathogenic influence. His handwriting became increasingly erratic, and his normally precise sketches of anatomical observations took on a distorted quality that reflected his deteriorating mental state. Anna's dietary requirements had expanded beyond any reasonable expectation for a pregnant woman, regardless of her exceptional size. Dr. Zimmerman documented her consumption of quantities of food that should have resulted in severe digestive complications, yet she processed these massive meals with apparent ease. More concerning were her developing cravings for substances that possessed no nutritional value: chalk, coal, and various metallic compounds that she consumed with evident satisfaction. The movements within Anna's womb had evolved into patterns that suggested conscious intent rather than reflexive fetal activity. Dr. Zimmerman's observations indicated periods of coordinated motion that seemed to respond to external stimuli in ways that defied understanding of prenatal neurological development. The strength of these movements had increased to the point where they were visible through Anna's abdominal wall, creating undulations that resembled the surface of a disturbed pond. The physician's attempts to estimate delivery date proved futile, as Anna's pregnancy extended far beyond normal gestational periods. His calculations suggested that the child should have been born months earlier, yet the pregnancy continued with no signs of natural labor. The absence of typical prenatal complications in the face of such extraordinary circumstances challenged every principle of obstetric medicine. Dr. Zimmerman's documentation from this period reveals his growing conviction that he was witnessing something that existed outside the boundaries of natural law. His scientific training warred with observations that demanded explanations beyond the scope of conventional medicine. The isolation imposed by his colleagues' rejection forced him to confront these phenomena alone, without the support or validation of the medical community. The financial strain of his declining practice, combined with the extraordinary expenses associated with Anna's care, pushed Dr. Zimmerman toward bankruptcy. His journal entries reveal a man consumed by professional obligation despite mounting personal costs. The specialized equipment required for Anna's examinations, the custom instruments needed for accurate measurements, and the constant need for consultation materials drained his resources entirely. As spring progressed towards summer, Dr. Zimmerman's documentation took on an increasingly urgent tone. His observations suggested that Anna's pregnancy was approaching some form of culmination. Though the nature of that resolution remained terrifyingly unclear, the stage was set for events that would test the limits of human comprehension. The summer of 1879 marked a turning point in Dr. Zimmerman's documentation, as his observations entered realms that challenged the fundamental principles of medical science. His journal entries from June reveal a physician who had abandoned conventional methodology in favor of recording phenomena that defied rational explanation. The careful clinical language that had characterized his earlier work gave way to descriptions that bordered on the metaphysical. Anna's physical transformation had progressed beyond any recognizable pattern of human pregnancy. Her body had assumed proportions that seemed to violate basic laws of anatomy and physics. Dr. Zimmermann's measurements indicated that her abdominal cavity had expanded to dimensions that should have resulted in complete organ failure. Yet her vital functions remained not only stable, but enhanced. Her respiratory capacity had increased dramatically, her circulation improved, and her neurological responses had become unnaturally acute. The developing child's movements had evolved into patterns that suggested a level of consciousness and coordination impossible for any human fetus. Dr. Zimmermann documented periods of activity that seemed to respond to external stimuli with deliberate intent. The child appeared to react to changes in lighting, temperature, and even the doctor's presence during examinations. These responses occurred with a precision and timing that implied cognitive awareness far beyond the capabilities of prenatal development. The physician's examination techniques had evolved into procedures that bore little resemblance to conventional obstetric practice. He had developed methods of assessment that relied more on intuition than scientific protocol, as traditional medical instruments proved inadequate for measuring phenomena that existed outside normal parameters. His sketches from this period depict anatomical configurations that seem to shift and reconfigure between observations. Dr. Zimmermann's attempts to document the child's estimated size yielded measurements that he initially refused to record, believing his calculations must contain fundamental errors. Only after weeks of repeated verification using multiple methodologies did he reluctantly commit his findings to paper. The numbers suggested a developing infant whose dimensions exceeded those of many adult humans. Yet Anna continued to carry this impossible burden with apparent ease. The atmospheric disturbances surrounding the Bates residence had intensified throughout the summer months. Dr. Zimmermann documented temperature fluctuations that occurred without meteorological explanation, electromagnetic anomalies that affected sensitive instruments, and acoustic phenomena that seemed to emanate from within Anna's body itself. These observations, while recorded with scientific precision, suggested influences that operated beyond the scope of natural law. Local wildlife had begun to exhibit behavioral patterns that reflected the unusual nature of events at the Bates property. Dr. Zimmermann noted the complete absence of birds from the surrounding area, the migration of small mammals to distant territories, and the agitation of livestock kept within a radius of several miles. These changes occurred gradually but consistently, creating a zone of biological disturbance that expanded outward from Anna's location. The doctor's own physical condition had deteriorated to the point where his ability to continue his observations was seriously compromised. His journal entries revealed symptoms that suggested exposure to some form of pathogenic influence that operated through mechanisms unknown to medical science. His handwriting had become increasingly erratic, his sketches distorted, and his normally methodical approach to documentation showed signs of significant cognitive impairment. Anna's dietary requirements had evolved beyond any reasonable expectation for human consumption. Dr. Zimmermann documented her ingestion of substances that possessed no nutritional value, yet seemed essential for maintaining her extraordinary condition. Her consumption of metallic compounds, mineral deposits, and various chemical substances occurred with a regularity that suggested biological necessity rather than aberrant craving. The physician's correspondence with international colleagues had ceased entirely as his reputation within the medical community suffered irreparable damage. His attempts to share his observations were met with accusations of professional incompetence or outright fraud. The isolation imposed by this rejection forced Dr. Zimmerman to confront the implications of his findings without external validation or support. The financial consequences of his dedication to Anna's case had reduced Dr. Zimmerman to near poverty. His practice had collapsed under the weight of professional ostracism. His personal resources had been exhausted by the extraordinary expenses associated with specialized equipment and consultation materials, and his ability to maintain even basic living standards had been severely compromised. The doctor's documentation from this period reveals his growing realization that Anna's pregnancy represented something that transcended the boundaries of natural reproduction. His observations suggested that the developing child possessed characteristics that challenged fundamental assumptions about human biology and development. The implications of these findings, if accurate, would necessitate a complete revision of medical understanding. As summer progressed toward autumn, Dr. Zimmerman's journal entries took on an increasingly apocalyptic tone. His measurements indicated that Anna's condition was approaching some form of resolution, though the nature of that culmination remained beyond his ability to predict or prepare for. The stage was set for events that would test not only the limits of medical knowledge, but the very foundations of reality itself. The threshold between the possible and impossible had been crossed, and there could be no return to the comfortable certainties of conventional understanding. The autumn of 1879 brought with it a series of developments that would forever shatter Dr. Zimmerman's conception of medical reality. His journal entries from September reveal a man who had crossed the threshold from scientific observation into realms that defied human comprehension. The meticulous documentation that had once characterized his work now served as a record of phenomena that challenged the very foundations of existence itself. Anna's transformation had progressed beyond any recognizable form of human pregnancy into something that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of biology and physics. Her body had assumed dimensions that should have resulted in immediate gravitational collapse, yet she moved with a fluid grace that mocked the limitations of human anatomy. Dr. Zimmerman's measurements indicated that her mass had increased to proportions that exceeded the structural capacity of human bone and muscle. Yet her skeletal system showed no signs of stress or deformation. The developing child's presence had become so pronounced that its outline was clearly visible through Anna's abdominal wall. Dr. Zimmerman documented the appearance of anatomical features that seemed to shift and reconfigure with each observation. The child's limbs appeared to possess joints and articulation points that followed no recognizable pattern of human development. More disturbing still were the additional appendages that occasionally became visible during periods of intense fetal activity. The physician's examination procedures had evolved into rituals that bore no resemblance to conventional medical practice. His instruments, custom crafted by artisans who worked in complete ignorance of their purpose, detected phenomena that existed outside the spectrum of normal human perception. The readings he obtained suggested biological processes that operated according to principles unknown to medical science. Dr. Zimmerman's attempts to monitor the child's vital signs yielded results that challenged his understanding of cardiovascular physiology. The cardiac rhythms he detected suggested the presence of multiple hearts operating in complex synchronization. The blood pressure readings indicated circulatory pressures that should have resulted in immediate vascular rupture. Yet Anna's cardiovascular system adapted to these impossible demands with apparent ease. The atmospheric disturbances surrounding the Bates residence had intensified to the point where they affected the basic functioning of mechanical devices. Dr. Zimmerman documented the failure of timepieces within a specific radius of Anna's location, the malfunction of compass needles that spun without reference to magnetic north. and the spontaneous combustion of certain metallic objects when brought into proximity with her body. The doctor's own physical deterioration had accelerated throughout the autumn months. His journal entries reveal symptoms that suggested exposure to influences that operated beyond the scope of conventional pathology. His vision had become distorted, particularly during examinations of Anna's condition, and his sense of spatial orientation had been compromised to the point where he frequently became lost within familiar environments. Local residents had begun to abandon their properties in the surrounding area as the zone of disturbance expanded outward from the Bates residence. Dr. Zimmerman documented the systematic evacuation of farms and homesteads as livestock died without apparent cause and crops failed despite favorable growing conditions. The economic impact of these departures created a region of desolation that seemed to spread with each passing week. Anna's dietary requirements had evolved to include substances that possessed no earthly origin. Dr. Zimmerman observed her consumption of materials that seemed to manifest spontaneously within her immediate environment. These substances, which defied chemical analysis using available techniques, appeared to be essential for maintaining the impossible pregnancy that had consumed her body entirely. The movements within Anna's womb had become so violent that they were audible from considerable distances. Dr. Zimmerman documented sounds that resembled the grinding of massive machinery, the collision of enormous objects, and occasionally what seemed to be vocalizations that followed no pattern of human speech. These acoustic phenomena occurred with increasing frequency and intensity as the pregnancy progressed toward its unknowable conclusion. The physician's correspondence had ceased entirely as his reputation within the medical community suffered complete destruction. His former colleagues now regarded him as either mentally incompetent or deliberately fraudulent. The isolation imposed by this professional exile forced Dr. Zimmerman to confront the implications of his observations without any external validation or support. The financial consequences of his dedication to Anna's case had reduced Dr. Zimmerman to complete destitution. His personal belongings had been sold to fund the extraordinary expenses associated with his research. His living conditions had deteriorated to the point of squalor, and his ability to maintain even basic nutrition had been severely compromised. The doctor's documentation from this period reveals his growing conviction that Anna's pregnancy represented something that transcended the boundaries of natural reproduction entirely. His observations suggested that the developing child possessed characteristics that belonged more to the realm of cosmic horror than human biology. The implications of these findings, if accurate, would necessitate a complete revision of humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. As autumn progressed toward winter, Dr. Zimmerman's journal entries took on the quality of a man preparing for an apocalyptic revelation that would shatter the comfortable illusions of human civilization. The winter of 1879 descended upon the Bates residence like a shroud of inevitability, bringing with it the culmination of events that had consumed Dr. Zimmerman's existence for over a year. His journal entries from December reveal a man who had witnessed the gradual dissolution of reality itself, documenting phenomena that existed beyond the boundaries of human comprehension. The careful scientific methodology that had once defined his approach had given way to desperate attempts to record the unrecordable. Anna's condition had transcended any recognizable form of pregnancy and entered realms that challenged the fundamental nature of biological existence. Her body had become a vessel for something that operated according to principles unknown to terrestrial life. Dr. Zimmerman's final measurements indicated dimensions that defied the basic laws of physics. Yet Anna continued to function with a vitality that seemed to draw energy from sources beyond human understanding. The developing child's presence had become so overwhelming that it dominated every aspect of the surrounding environment. Dr. Zimmerman documented the appearance of anatomical structures that seemed to exist partially outside normal spatial dimensions. The child's form appeared to extend beyond the confines of Anna's womb, creating distortions in the fabric of reality itself that were visible to the naked eye. The physician's examination procedures had evolved into desperate attempts to comprehend phenomena that existed outside the spectrum of human perception. His instruments, pushed beyond their design limitations, detected readings that suggested the presence of biological processes that operated according to alien principles. The data he collected indicated metabolic rates that should have resulted in spontaneous combustion, yet Anna's body temperature remained within normal parameters. Dr. Zimmerman's attempts to predict the timing of delivery had proven futile, as Anna's pregnancy extended far beyond any conceivable gestational period. His calculations suggested that the child should have been born over a year earlier, yet the pregnancy continued with no signs of natural resolution. The absence of typical labor symptoms in the face of such extraordinary circumstances suggested that the birth process itself would follow no recognizable pattern. The atmospheric disturbances surrounding the Bates residence had reached levels that affected the basic structure of matter itself. Dr. Zimmerman documented the spontaneous transformation of common materials into substances that defied chemical analysis. Water became viscous and luminescent, metal objects developed organic properties, and the air itself took on a density that made breathing increasingly difficult. The doctor's own physical condition had deteriorated to the point where his continued survival seemed impossible. His journal entries reveal symptoms that suggested fundamental alterations to his cellular structure. His bones had become brittle yet somehow stronger. His blood had taken on an unusual coloration, and his nervous system had developed sensitivities that allowed him to perceive phenomena invisible to normal human senses. Local authorities had cordoned off the area surrounding the Bates residence as reports of impossible events reached government officials. Dr. Zimmerman documented the arrival of military personnel who established a perimeter around the property, though their presence seemed to have no effect on the continuing escalation of anomalous phenomena. Several soldiers who ventured too close to the residence were found days later in states of catatonic shock. Anna's dietary requirements had evolved to include substances that seemed to materialize from the surrounding environment through processes that violated conservation of mass. Dr. Zimmerman observed her consumption of materials that appeared to be composed of elements not found on the periodic table. These substances provided nourishment for both Anna and the developing child, while simultaneously altering the fundamental properties of her physiology. The movements within Anna's womb had become so violent that they created seismic disturbances detectable by sensitive instruments located miles away. Dr. Zimmerman documented tremors that seemed to originate from within Anna's body and propagate outward through the earth itself. These disturbances followed patterns that suggested conscious intent rather than random fetal activity. The physician's documentation from this period reveals his growing realization that Anna's pregnancy represented something that transcended the boundaries of natural reproduction entirely. His observations suggested that the developing child possessed characteristics that belonged to a form of existence fundamentally different from terrestrial life. The implications of these findings threatened to shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmic order. The financial and professional consequences of his dedication to Anna's case had reduced Dr. Zimmerman to a state of complete isolation. His former life had been entirely consumed by his obsession with documenting phenomena that defied rational explanation. The comfortable certainties of medical practice had been replaced by a desperate struggle to comprehend forces that operated beyond human understanding. As winter deepened, Dr. Zimmerman's journal entries took on the quality of final testimony from a man who had witnessed the approach of something that would forever alter the nature of human existence. The stage was set for revelation that would challenge the very foundations of reality itself. The final weeks of December 1879 brought with them an acceleration of events that would forever mark the boundary between the known and unknowable. Dr. Zimmerman's journal entries from this period reveal a man who had abandoned all pretense of scientific objectivity in favor of documenting the approach of something that transcended human comprehension. His handwriting, now barely legible, recorded observations that challenged the very nature of existence itself. Anna's condition had reached a state that defied every principle of biological possibility. Her body had become a conduit for forces that operated according to laws unknown to terrestrial science. Dr. Zimmerman's final measurements indicated that the developing child had achieved dimensions that existed partially outside normal spatial constraints. The pregnancy had evolved beyond mere gestation into something that resembled a cosmic event, contained within human form. The atmospheric disturbances surrounding the Bates residence had intensified to the point where they affected the fundamental structure of reality itself. Dr. Zimmerman documented the appearance of spatial anomalies that seemed to fold the surrounding environment into impossible configurations. Distances became inconsistent, with the journey from one room to another sometimes requiring hours, while at other times occurring instantaneously. The developing child's movements had evolved into patterns that suggested communication with entities existing beyond the boundaries of human perception. Dr. Zimmerman observed periods of coordinated activity that seemed to respond to signals originating from sources located far beyond the Earth's atmosphere. These communications occurred through mechanisms that operated outside the electromagnetic spectrum, utilizing principles that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness itself. The physician's own transformation had progressed to the point where his continued existence as a recognizably human entity was questionable. His journal entries reveal alterations to his sensory apparatus that allowed him to perceive phenomena invisible to normal human observation. His vision had expanded to include spectrums of light that revealed the true nature of the forces operating within Anna's body, while his hearing had become sensitive to frequencies that carried information from realms beyond terrestrial experience. Local military personnel had established increasingly distant perimeters as the zone of disturbance expanded outward from the Bates residence. Dr. Zimmerman documented the failure of conventional weapons and equipment when brought into proximity with the anomalous phenomena. Gunpowder refused to ignite, metal corroded instantaneously, and electronic devices malfunctioned in ways that suggested interference from sources operating outside known physical laws. Anna's dietary requirements had evolved to include substances that seemed to manifest directly from the fabric of space itself. Dr. Zimmerman observed her consumption of materials that possessed properties inconsistent with any known form of matter. These substances appeared to provide nourishment not only for Anna and the developing child, but also for the expanding zone of reality distortion that surrounded them. The movements within Anna's womb had become so violent that they created distortions in the flow of time itself. Dr. Zimmerman documented periods where his chronometers recorded the passage of hours, while his subjective experience suggested only minutes had elapsed. These temporal anomalies followed patterns that seemed to correlate with the child's periods of greatest activity, suggesting a connection between fetal development and the fundamental structure of space-time. The physician's documentation from this period reveals his growing conviction that Anna's pregnancy represented the manifestation of something that existed beyond the boundaries of human reality. His observations suggested that the developing child possessed characteristics that belonged to a form of existence fundamentally alien to terrestrial life. The implications of these findings threatened to shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmic hierarchy. The financial and social consequences of his dedication to Anna's case had reduced Dr. Zimmerman to a state of complete isolation from human society. His former colleagues now regarded him as either completely insane or deliberately fraudulent, while local authorities had classified his reports as the ravings of a madman. The comfortable certainties of civilized existence had been replaced by a desperate struggle to comprehend forces that operated according to principles beyond human understanding. The doctor's physical condition had deteriorated to the point where his survival seemed to depend on proximity to the anomalous phenomena he had spent so long documenting. His journal entries reveal a growing dependence on the altered environment surrounding Anna's residence, as if exposure to the impossible had fundamentally changed his biological requirements. Distance from the source of disturbance resulted in severe physical distress, while proximity brought a form of vitality that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. As the year drew to its close, Dr. Zimmerman's journal entries took on the quality of final preparations for an event that would forever alter the nature of human existence. His observations suggested that Anna's pregnancy was approaching a culmination that would challenge the very foundations of reality itself. The stage was set for a revelation that would mark the end of one era of human understanding and the beginning of something entirely unprecedented. The final entry in Dr. Zimmerman's journal, dated January 3, 1880, consists of a single line written in handwriting so distorted it barely resembles human script. The child has arrived, and with it, the end of everything we thought we knew. The pages that follow remain blank, their yellowed surfaces bearing only the faint impressions of words that were never completed, thoughts that could never be adequately expressed in human language. The official records from the Pennsylvania State Medical Board indicate that Dr. Heinrich Zimmerman disappeared on January 4, 1880, along with Anna and Martin Bates. The residence where these extraordinary events had unfolded was found empty, its interior bearing signs of disturbance that defied rational explanation. Furniture had been fused into impossible configurations. Walls showed evidence of forces that had operated according to unknown physical principles, and the very air within the structure possessed properties that made extended exposure dangerous to human health. Military investigators who examined the scene reported findings that were immediately classified and sealed within government archives. Their reports, partially declassified in 1987, describe evidence of phenomena that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. Photographs taken during the investigation show spatial distortions that seem to persist even after the departure of their apparent source, creating permanent alterations to the fabric of local space-time. The fate of the child whose development had consumed Dr. Zimmerman's final years remains unknown. No birth certificate was ever filed, no medical records exist beyond Dr. Zimmerman's increasingly incomprehensible journal entries, and no witness testimony provides reliable information about the ultimate outcome of Anna's impossible pregnancy. The absence of concrete evidence has allowed the case to fade into the realm of medical folklore, dismissed by mainstream science as an elaborate hoax or the product of collective delusion. However, certain anomalous phenomena documented in the decades following the disappearance suggest that the events at the Bates residence may have had consequences that extended far beyond their immediate participants. Geological surveys of the area reveal subsurface formations that follow no recognizable pattern of natural development. Seismic monitoring stations detect periodic disturbances that seem to originate from deep within the Earth beneath the former Bates property, following rhythmic patterns that suggest biological rather than geological origins. Local wildlife populations have never fully recovered from the disruptions of 1879-1880. Species that once thrived in the region remain absent, while new forms of plant and animal life have appeared that possess characteristics unknown to established taxonomy. These organisms display adaptive capabilities that seem to operate according to principles beyond conventional evolutionary theory, suggesting exposure to influences that fundamentally altered their biological programming. The descendants of families who lived in the surrounding area during the events continue to report unusual phenomena that seem to correlate with the original disturbances. Children born in the region display heightened sensitivities to electromagnetic fields, unusual resistance to certain forms of disease, and occasionally perceptual abilities that allow them to detect phenomena invisible to normal human observation. These characteristics appear to be hereditary, suggesting that exposure to the anomalous events created permanent alterations to human genetic structure. Dr. Zimmerman's journal, discovered over a century after his disappearance, represents the only detailed documentation of events that challenge the fundamental nature of human understanding. The gradual deterioration of his handwriting and the increasing incomprehensibility of his observations provide a record of a mind struggling to process phenomena that existed beyond the boundaries of rational thought. His final entries suggest that he had achieved a level of understanding that transcended normal human consciousness, though at a cost that ultimately consumed his sanity and perhaps his very existence. The implications of Dr. Zimmerman's documentation, if accepted as accurate, would necessitate a complete revision of humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmic order. The events he recorded suggest that the boundaries between the possible and impossible are far more permeable than conventional science acknowledges, and that forces exist which operate according to principles that dwarf human comprehension. Modern attempts to investigate the site of the former Bates residence have yielded inconclusive results. Advanced scientific instruments detect anomalies that seem to exist at the very edge of measurable phenomena, while sensitive individuals report experiences that echo Dr. Zimmerman's original observations. The area remains officially unrestricted, yet few researchers have shown interest in pursuing investigations that might validate findings too disturbing for comfortable acceptance. The case of Anna Bates and her impossible pregnancy stands as a testament to the limitations of human understanding when confronted with forces that operate beyond the boundaries of natural law. Dr. Zimmerman's sacrifice in documenting these events provides a glimpse into realms of existence that humanity may not be prepared to comprehend, serving as both warning and invitation to those brave enough to peer beyond the comfortable certainties of conventional reality. The truth, whatever its nature, remains buried beneath layers of official denial and willful ignorance, waiting for minds capable of accepting revelations that could shatter the foundations of human civilization itself. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Sinister Memory. If you enjoyed today's investigation, subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell to be alerted when we unveil our next dark chronicle. Share your thoughts about this case in the comments below. We read every single one, and your ideas often lead us to our next investigation. Until next time.